Hi Year 6. I'm going to be reading Letters from the Lighthouse by Emma Carroll to you. I'm in my garden at the moment at home. This is Herbie, my dog, who won't cooperate. So you might just see him moving around in the background. Anyway, let's get started. So I introduced this in guided reading last week. So many of us have already looked at some extracts from it. It's a fantastic book about evacuees and I really recommend it. But anyway, I'm going to be reading it to you. So here we go. Chapter 1, Keep Calm and Carry On. We were halfway through the news when the air raid started. It was a Friday in January. We were at the Picture Palace for the 6 p.m. showing of The Mark of Zorro. All month the Luftwaffe had been attacking us, their bombs falling on London like pennies from a jar, so the fact they couldn't hold off for just a few measly hours made me hate the Germans that little bit more. The cinema trip had been my sister Sookie's idea, as most things were. We were all in need of cheering up that evening. After the tea we'd just eaten at home, it was a wonder we were still alive. "It's like brains," Cliff, my 8-year-old brother, said, lifting the pan lid to show us. It was probably only minced meat and potatoes, but you never knew with Mum's dinners, especially the ones you had to reheat when she was working late. And Cliff relished gory details, being the sort who'd pick scabs off his knees just to see what was underneath. "Well, you never get scabby knees, Olive," he once said to me, like it was the biggest character flaw in the world. The truth was I preferred reading books to running about in the street. I didn't see it as a weakness either. But we had to eat the horrid supper, of course. No one chucked food away with a war on, not even stuff that resembled brains. You simply pinched your nose and swallowed hard, then glugged down a glass of water. Afterwards, Sookie, being the eldest and in charge, said we deserved a trip out. She'd already seen the film last week with a friend. "It's the cat's pyjamas. You'll both love it," she gushed, as we went around the house closing the blackout curtains. Then to me, teasingly, "Cheer up, it's going to be fun." Shh. People were always telling me I had a serious face because I was dark and thoughtful looking like my dad. What they really meant was I wasn't as pretty as Sookie, and I didn't mind because I was proud of my big sister, not jealous. She was just as marvellous on the inside. Everyone seemed to think so. "Is that better?" I beamed up at Sookie so she could tell how thrilled I was to be going out, especially with her. We didn't see nearly enough of her anymore. She'd recently got a pen pal and acted mysterious when letters postmarked Devon arrived addressed to her. We'd all guessed who she was writing to. Our next door neighbour, Gloria, had a younger sister called Queenie, who was 19 and lived in Devon. Having a pen pal was, according to Sookie, all the rage. And like she was with anything new, Sookie threw herself into it, kicking off her office shoes each night after work, then disappearing to her room to write. It wasn't the same as when we'd sent letters to Dad, where we each got to add our own line on the official Blue Army paper. Sookie shut her door on us. These were her letters, hers and Queenie's. I often wondered what they had to say to each other that was so private and took up so much time. Once we'd got our coats and grabbed our gas masks from where they hung in the hallway, we were ready for the cinema. It was a cold, damp evening, and we were all done up in woolly hats and scarves. Cliff's mittens, on string threaded through his coat, dangled limp at the end of his sleeves, and he flapped them like wings to make me laugh. Such was my excitement, I didn't think to ask why Sookie was buttoning up Mum's best green checked coat rather than her own. She'd done her hair different too, curled like a film star's, and was wearing post-box red lipstick. It made her look older than 17, and rather like Mum, the Mum before Dad died, who'd styled her hair and worn makeup and could argue for England. By the time we reached the Picture Palace, the lights were already dimming. We'd only just found our seats, row K, plush velvet that prickled the backs of your knees, when the great maroon curtains swung apart with a squeak. First up was the newsreel. Every film show started like this, with 5 minutes of news from home and abroad. It was all very upbeat, with a proper English voice telling us everything would be all right, even if the film footage showed bomb sites and battlefields. I watched eagerly, chin in hand, as the big white titles said the word Pathé. Sookie, though, leapt to her feet. "Stay here," she whispered to us. "If I'm not back in 2 minutes, meet me in the foyer when the film's over." Just like that, she disappeared. "She needs the lav," Cliff said knowingly. "That supper's given her grief." "You're disgusting, you are," I replied, not taking my eyes from the newsreel. The footage was of men in RAF uniforms walking across an airfield. Immediately, it made me think of Dad. In August last year, we'd had a telegram from the War Office telling us Dad's plane had been shot down over France. 6 long months had passed of every day hearing someone in my family crying and Mum getting sadder and thinner. I couldn't sleep through a whole night anymore. Often, I barely slept at all. "Look for the light," Dad used to say when things were difficult. I did try. He'd died for his country, people said. He was a hero. Watching the news helped me believe this was true, and as I listened to what a mightily fine job our boys were doing, I could feel myself filling up with pride. Tonight's news switched from RAF men to a city somewhere abroad. I didn't catch where. The footage showed hungry-looking people queuing for food, flanked either side by soldiers. There was snow on the ground. The people in line wore star-shaped badges on their coats. Watching, I began to feel uncomfortable instead of proud. The Pathé News voice, jolly and brisk, jarred with what I was seeing. These people weren't just hungry, but scared. I could tell by their faces how desperate they were, and it made me horribly guilty for the fuss we'd made about our supper. Abruptly, the film stopped. The lights came up. I blinked at the announcement on the screen. "Air raid in progress. Please leave the theatre immediately. Head to the nearest shelter." "Blast it," I said, reaching for my coat and gas mask. "Come on, Cliff. We'd better find Sookie." People began to leave, though not very quickly. All around us, seats thudded as they flipped upright. Coats were shaken out, hats pinned in place. There was a fair bit of complaining going on too. "Should we ask for our money back?" asked Cliff. "What?" I was still half thinking of those poor people in the newsreel. "We'll ask Sookie. Keep hold of my hand." Weaving through the crowds, we headed for the foyer. It was then the seriousness of our situation sank in. Beginning to worry, I told myself this was no different from any other raid, and they were happening almost every day now. Most of the action was down near the docks on Fairfoot Road, where we lived. They'd been more of an annoyance, forcing you out of bed in the middle of the night and into a freezing cold air raid shelter. In the foyer, the lights were off. All I could see were the outlines of the front doors and the cash desk just inside. Already the space was filling up with people, but our sister wasn't one of them. "She can't still be in the labs." Cliff's hand felt sticky in mine. "She's probably powdering her nose," I said, with a confidence I wasn't feeling. "You've seen how glammed up she is tonight. She's the dead spit of Mum. She's got her best coat on, that's why." I tapped my foot anxiously. "Come on, Sookie." As the last few people came out into the foyer, the mood seemed to change. People were hurrying, jostling into those already making their way out. "Stop pushing!" a man shouted like he was in charge. "We'll get you all out, just slow down." Holding Cliff's hand even tighter, I wasn't sure what to do. Stay and wait for Sookie, or go with everyone else to the nearest shelter. Someone was shining a torch at the floor to help guide people's feet. Then that went out too. A woman screamed, and though no one else joined in, you could feel the panic building. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "Stay here, Cliff. I'm going to find—" A hand came down heavily on my shoulder. "You lassie, and you laddie." It was the man in charge. "What you dithering here for?" I tried to explain. "My sister's in the toilet." "I've just checked the labs. Ain't nobody left inside but us, sweetheart." The second voice was a woman's. 2 sets of hands steered us towards the door. Before I could shrug them off, we were out on the pavement. The noises, the smells of burning hit me at once. I felt a jolt of pure, cold fear. Up in the sky, searchlight beams crisscrossed the darkness. Already I could hear the faint crack-crack of our guns as the German aircraft got closer, and fought the urge to cover my head protectively with my arms. "I don't like it, Olive," Cliff muttered. I didn't either. And until we found Sookie, I was the big sister, the responsible one. That was pretty alarming too. "Don't worry," I told him. A stupid thing to say, but it was all I could think of. "Sookie's probably waiting for us in the shelter." We hurried down the street after the last few stragglers. By now the roads were almost deserted. On the corner, an air raid warden waved frantically, the white stripes of his uniform dimly visible in the blackout. "Hurry up, you lot!" he shouted. What are you waiting for? Christmas? Still holding Cliff's hand, I crossed the road. Thankfully, there in front of us was the tube station, busy with men, women and a few little children who were heading through the entrance with packets of sandwiches and pillows under their arms. Moving amongst the crowd was a Women's Royal Voluntary Service person in her navy blue uniform, hurrying people inside. "Come on, you two," she said, seeing Cliff and me on our own without a grown-up. I was glad to have an adult take charge. There's going to be cake and board games laid on tonight. It'll be quite a party down there. Cliff, liking the sound of it, reached out to take her hand. In doing so, he let go of mine. He was only a few paces ahead of me, going down the steps with the nice WRVS lady. I just happened to glance behind. At a sound. At a sense. Something. There was Sookie, looking around in panic. The relief made my legs go weak. "Sookie!" I yelled, waving madly. "Over here!" She was running away from the shelter, and fast too, faster than I'd ever seen her run before, her arms pumping like pistons. She didn't turn or slow down. I don't think she even heard me. The air raid warden was yelling now. "Bomb incoming! Get down!" He threw himself onto the pavement. I wasn't quick enough. The telltale whistling came next. An eerie silence. Then a whomp as the bomb hit just a few 100 yards away. The ground rocked underneath me. Air was sucked from my chest, making me gasp and stagger backwards, though somehow I stayed on my feet. Glass smashed, bricks fell, planes droned onwards. Everything swirled dizzily together. For a moment, I didn't know which way the sky was. As the dust cleared, my stunned brain did too. 20 yards or so up ahead was my sister. She was limping slightly, with one of her shoes missing, but still rapidly disappearing down the street. "Sookie!" I cried again in frustration. "Wait! We're here!" She was searching for us, I was certain, and knowing her, she wouldn't think to keep herself safe. She'd stay out here, not giving up until she found us. This was what terrified me. Cliff would be all right in the shelter with the WRVS lady. What mattered was getting hold of Sookie. Sidestepping the air raid warden as he got unsteadily to his feet, I ran after my sister. The warden shouted something, I didn't hear what. "Sookie, slow down!" I cried, gas mask box bouncing at my hip. She was too far ahead. A silly random thought came to me of how nice her hair still looked as it swung against the green of Mum's coat. Then panic. I'd never catch up with her. I'd a stitch in my side, and even hobbling with one shoe, she was still too quick for me. This part of the road had already been badly hit. The air was thick with brick dust and smoke, making me cough horribly. The road, full of potholes, was lined either side with blackened, shadowy shop fronts. Smashed glass from blown-out windows scrunched beneath my feet, and there was water everywhere, gushing past my feet. My ears were ringing. I felt light-headed too, as if everything was unreal, like I was watching myself in a film. Still, the planes kept coming. Whoosh! Silence. You could count the beats between. Then thud as a bomb hit. I was angry at my own feeble legs for not going any faster, but eventually I had to stop. Doubling over, I gasped for breath. Up ahead at last, Sookie was slowing down too, thank goodness. It was then I saw why. Emerging from an alleyway was a man I didn't recognise. He was tall with slicked back hair, wearing a Macintosh belted tightly around his middle. He looked wet through, like he'd waded through a river to get here. Sookie went right up to him and shook his hand. I stopped in the middle of the street, confused. What was she doing? They were talking now. It didn't look like a normal chat about the weather either, because their heads were close together, and the man kept glancing behind him. He gave Sookie a piece of paper before taking her hand and squeezing it in both of his. Was she out here searching for us then? It didn't look that way. All I knew was she'd left us in a hurry, and this was where she'd gone. Not to the toilet or the tube station, but to meet a young man. It was probably why she'd got glammed up in the first place. I didn't know whether to laugh or burst into tears. "Sookie!" I yelled. She spun round. A strange look flitted over her face. As the man shrank back into the shadows, Sookie hobbled towards me, shaking her head. "You shouldn't have followed me." She sounded furious, frightened. It made me scared too. I grabbed onto her coat sleeve. Now I'd found her, I wasn't letting go. As more planes droned overhead, She glanced worriedly at the sky. "Oh, hell! Get down!" A terrific whump pitched me forwards on my knees. All round I heard cracking sounds as windows bent inwards. Another bomb hit with a thump. Something heavy was falling nearby. I cowered down, too terrified to look. A minute passed, or it might have been an hour. I was too disorientated to be sure. When I did lift my head to look around, the street was full of glass and water. A burst main soaked everything like a downpour. Sookie was nowhere to be seen. The ringing in my ears was deafening. Where the shop fronts had been before was now just a heap of smoking rubble. I tried to stand, only suddenly there was nothing to stand on. The air filled with screaming and a horrid smell like burning hair. The sky flashed brilliant white. I felt myself lift up and up like I'd never stop. There was no air to breathe. Then I was falling down again, very hard and very fast. I don't remember the landing part. Chapter 2, Make Do and Mend. "Aren't you the lucky one?" said an unfamiliar woman's voice. My eyes didn't want to open. I'd been dreaming that Dad was here. He was standing at the end of the bed, resting his elbows on the bed frame, about to wish me "Nighty-night, old girl," like he always did. I was desperate for him to stay so I could hear those words, because I was sure then I'd be able to sleep right through the night again. "Shh! You'll scare Dad away," I said to the woman who was talking. She was jolly insistent though. "Come on, dearie, wake up." She shook me just once and suddenly everything hurt, from my toes all the way to my back teeth. The disinfectant smell was unmistakable. Uneasily I opened one eye, then the other, taking in the white curtains half pulled around my bed, the white sheets and the whiter-than-white apron-clad nurse who hovered at my side. It was all so bright it hurt to look at. She'd called me lucky, but I didn't see how. "You're at St Leonard's Hospital," the nurse said. "The ambulance picked you up last night. Come all across town you have." Which meant it was Saturday, a whole day later. I felt a wave of panic. "I'd better get home. My mum will wonder where I am," I said, trying to sit up in bed and failing miserably. "Is my brother here? Is he all right?" "Keep still, or you'll pull your dressings off," the nurse warned. I began to cry. She got cross with me then. "For pity's sake, you've only got concussion and cuts and bruises. There were plenty brought in last night who won't walk again." I had an egg-sized bump on my forehead, so she told me, a whopping great bruise on my left hip where the explosion had knocked me off my feet, a few minor cuts on my hands. No wonder everything hurt. My stupid eyes kept on filling too. What about Cliff? I needed to know he was safe. "He was in the shelter in the tube station. That wasn't hit, was it? He's called Cliff Bradshaw. He's only 8 and—" I started sobbing again. The nurse's face softened. "The shelter wasn't hit. Don't worry, I'm sure your brother's fine. Though why you weren't sensible enough to be in there with him, I don't know." Nor did I. In a big stomach punch of guilt, it came back to me that I was meant to be looking after him. "Can you remember what happened?" the nurse asked. "Bits of it," I sniffed. "But not much after we left the cinema." Mum was working late. I'd been at home with Sookie and Cliff, hadn't I? Eating something horrible for our tea, and we went to see a film which Sookie said we'd like. Then the air raid siren went off, and then things started to get blurry. As the nurse helped me sit up, I read the name badge pinned to her chest. "Nurse Spencer," I said, trying to stop crying. "Does my mum know I'm here? Or my sister Sookie? If no one's home, you could try next door." Gloria, our neighbour, was good in a crisis, and right now I needed to see a friendly face. "I'll try to find out, though we're rushed off our feet today. In the meantime, let's get you a nice cup of tea." Nurse Spencer came back without tea. One look at her and I knew she had bad news. "Oh Lord," she said, closing the curtain behind her. "Maybe you weren't so lucky after all." I wanted to pull the covers up and hide, then she might go away and take her awful news with her. But I couldn't bear not to now, either. "It's not my brother, or—" I gulped. "My sister?" "It's your mother. A bomb landed on the building where she was last night." The ringing sound was back in my ears. I wasn't sure I'd heard her properly. "My mother?" "Yes, it was a direct hit. You mustn't think that she suffered." She probably said this to every relative every time, which I suppose was nice of her. The words, though, didn't sink in. The rescue crew found you in the street holding onto a coat, she explained. There was a name in the coat, Mrs. Rachel Bradshaw. You told them it was your mother's, but there was no sign of, she hesitated, of anyone else with you. What coat? I couldn't remember a coat, or how I came to be holding it. In frustration, I began sobbing again. Nurse Spencer patted my shoulder. Let me get you that tea, shall I? We might even have a spot of sugar to put in it. She left me staring at the curtains. My mother was dead. I'd last seen her yesterday leaving for work with Gloria. They both did shifts at a printing works in Whitechapel, and it being nice weather, they decided to walk rather than catch the bus. It was the first time since Tuesday Mum had got out of bed, and even then Sookie and her managed to argue. You should be resting, Sookie protested. You're not giving yourself a chance to get well. I rested for 3 days, didn't I? Stop fussing, Mum snapped back. Actually, what she'd mostly done was cry and stare at her bedroom ceiling, which didn't seem very restful to me. You're working too hard, Mum, Sookie kept on. The doctor said you should... That doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. Mum never did believe in doctors, and had only gone to see ours last week to stop Sookie nagging. Your mum needs to work, love, Gloria said, trying to keep the peace. Don't fret, she'll be all right. I'll be absolutely fine, Mum agreed, though she didn't look it. She was pale as anything, and went out of the front door with her hat on the wrong way round. I couldn't believe this would be my last memory of her. Come on, drink this, Nurse Spencer said, reappearing with a cup of tea. As I sipped, she knelt beside my bed, pulling out a box from underneath that smelled smoky and was full of damp clothes. The pleated skirt and Fair Isle sweater were mine. There was a hair clip, also mine, and my lace-up brown shoes, and my navy coat that was too short on the arms. It was a massive relief to see something I recognised. Then Nurse Spencer held up my mum's coat. As the fog in my head started to clear, it was Sookie I was seeing. Sookie looking glamorous and grown up as if she was making a special effort for someone. Sookie leaving us at the picture palace. Sookie disappearing off down a bombed-out street to meet a man I'd never seen before. The burst water main making everything wet. That was about all I could recall. The rest was still as dim as the cinema itself. Further down the ward, a nurse had started shouting, "It's not visiting hours, you can't just barge in!" Someone was running, their footsteps getting closer. The curtain round my bed swished back. A thin woman in a blue skirt and sweater rushed at me. "Olive, oh my darling, you're all right!" The cup of tea went everywhere, up the curtain, on the bedclothes, all over Nurse Spencer's apron. A second nurse bustled into the fray. "That's no way to carry on," she cried. "The poor kiddie's injured." Yet the woman with her arms round me didn't let go. She smelled so strongly of home, I thought I was dreaming again. "Are you a ghost?" I said, staring up at her. "Or just someone who looks like my mum?" The woman was crying and laughing at the same time. "You silly child." It was funny because she wrinkled her nose like Mum, and she had the same chipped front tooth. "What on earth were you playing at going out in an air raid?" She even sounded like Mum. I glanced at Nurse Spencer, who raised her hands in disbelief. "The notes that came in with your daughter, Mrs. Bradshaw, they must have made a mistake." She shook her head at the other nurse, who backed silently away. So the woman who looked like Mum was Mum. It was all a bit much. My head began to throb and I shut my eyes. "Olive," Mum said, stroking my fringe, "I need you to listen to me. I need you to be brave." Opening my eyes again, I swallowed nervously. "What's happened?" "Your sister didn't arrive at work today." Sookie was a typist for an insurance company in Clerkenwell. She said it was the dullest job ever. "Isn't today Saturday, though?" I asked. "She was due in to do overtime. No one's seen her since she was with you and Cliff last night. She's missing." "Missing?" I didn't understand. Mum nodded. The nurse added, rather unhelpfully, "We've had casualties from all over London. It's been chaos. All you can do is keep hoping for the best." It was obvious what she meant. I glanced at Mum, who always took the opposite view in any argument, but she stayed silent. Her hands, though, were trembling. "Missing isn't the same as dead," I pointed out. Mum grimaced. "That's true. and I've spoken to the War Office. Sookie's name isn't on their list of dead or injured, but so she's alive then. She must be. I saw her in the street talking to a man," I said. "When she realised I'd followed her, she was really furious about it." Mum looked at me, at the nurse, at the bump on my head. "Darling, you're concussed. Don't get overexcited now." "But you can't think she's dead," I insisted. "There's no proof, is there?" "Sometimes it's difficult to identify someone after," Mum faltered. I knew what she couldn't say. Sometimes if a body got blown apart, there'd be nothing left to tie a name tag to. It was why we'd never buried Dad. Perhaps if there'd been a coffin and a headstone and a vicar saying nice thing, it would have seemed more real. This felt different though. After a big air raid, the telephones were often down, letters got delayed, roads blocked. It might be a day or two before we heard from Sookie, and worried though I was, I knew she could look after herself. I wondered if it was part of Mum being ill, this painting the world black when it was grey. My head was hurting again, so I lay back against the pillows. I was fed up with this stupid, horrid war. 18 months ago when it started, everyone said it'd be over before Christmas, but they were wrong. It was still going on, tearing great holes in people's lives. We'd already lost Dad, and half the time these days it felt like Mum wasn't quite here. And now Sookie, who knew where she was. I didn't realise I was crying again until Mum touched my cheek. "It's not fair," I said weakly. "War isn't fair, I'm afraid," Mum replied. "You only have to walk through this hospital to see we're not the only ones suffering. Though that's just the tip of the iceberg, believe me. There's plenty worse going on in Europe." I remembered Sookie mentioning this too. She'd got really upset when she told me about the awful things happening to people Hitler didn't like. She was in the kitchen chopping onions at the time, so I wasn't aware she was crying properly. "What sort of awful things?" I'd asked her. "Food shortages, people being driven from their homes." Sookie took a deep breath as if the list was really long. "People being attacked for no reason or sent no one knows where, Jewish people in particular. They're made to wear yellow stars so everyone knows they're Jews, and then barred from shops and schools and even parts of the town where they live. It's heartbreaking to think we can't do anything about it. People threatened by soldiers, people queuing for food with stars on their coats. It was what I'd seen on last night's newsreel at the cinema. My murky brain could just about remember those dismal scenes, and it made me even more angry. How I hated this lousy war. I didn't know what I could do about it, a 13-year-old girl with a bump on her head, yet thinking there might be something made me feel a tiny bit better. My mind drifted back to my sister and how I'd seen her with a strange man. "Does Sookie have a boyfriend?" I asked. "How should I know?" Mum answered irritably. "She never tells me anything." And that's it for today. See us again for more tomorrow.